Hello, I'm Annie, or Anyfish, and I'll be going over how to make this quick and simple, sort of flowery poster in Womp using some like 3D and 2D elements. So I'll start by getting rid of that default cube, and this is one of my go-to sort of environment lighting scenarios where this very pretty one with the sky and trees creates this warm light, and it's especially very bright on the left hand side. And I'm using this so that once the whole thing is complete and I want to share or I want to look at it easily from the front, I can just quickly hit the left side of that cube on top, hit center, scroll up, and it'll be exactly in the middle, ready and where I want it. And so it's very nice to have it all aligned right from the get-go. Here I'm just trying to get a better idea of what thickness I want, how big I want the frame, what dimensions I kind of want the little negative spot to be, where the flowers come out of. And I'm just quickly adding some color just to better see how it looks. And then I often compare it or like go pretend like I'm going to share just to see how it looks like in that publish mode. From here I can see that it's a bit thick for what I want because I do want the flowers to easily kind of pierce through as if it's more paper-like. And so I'm just quickly adjusting that. And then I use, well, I don't know. It depends on how I go about things, but I usually add some sort of primitive or curve as a kind of scale because I know that's around like 100 by 100 for each sphere. And so I will scale up the whole thing just to get a little bit more like flexibility on how small I can make the curves, and it all just helps with like density and gooping and being able to do more with a bigger sort of scene. Now here I'm going to start making the background using a very big curve, and I'll increase the density. I usually start with like a density around like 100 and then goop around 40, and then I increase or decrease based on that. I'm starting just with the sort of blue-purple that's very dark at the top, and then going into a light blue, pink, and then kind of vibrant yellow. I did notice this color, like on my computer it looks pretty bright, but I saw when I was exporting it on a different screen, it looks a little less bright, maybe a little more dull. So if you're saying that, I would definitely try to make it as bright as possible. And I would probably tweak it a bit too, just to get like kind of fun colors. It's still a pastel sort of type of piece, but the more vibrancy, the more interesting sometimes in this kind of thing. From here, I just used a primitive to create very rough guides of where I would like the text to be on the kind of poster. Sorry, not portrait. And this just helps to see like how much space I actually have to write out what I want. Obviously, it is not nowhere near like perfect or required. It's very easy to change, but it's a good like kind of idea to see like how much space you really have and how tall you want each letter to be, because I'm not the best at keeping it consistent without kind of guides. And here I'm using mostly just primitives and negatives to make these letters. I've done curves in the past, but I think it's just a little more like straightforward with using negatives and curves, and you can measure things out a little bit better. You'll see I actually bring out like a piece of like the W side to get the same thickness in the O. I don't know how well that works because I'm not the best with like kerning and letters and weight and such, but I attempted to make it a little bit more even. Although it still looks, I don't know. The weight is hard to sort of judge, but I think it's all about trial and error, messing around, and seeing what you think looks best. The other thing I really like to do in these types of pieces is reuse whatever I can. Just because you already put the work in, so you might as well kind of use that effort, which is where like the W comes in very handy for the M. Or if you have a double letter, you should just copy and paste it, right? And it's less work for you. That's why I do like the Womp practice, because whatever you copy and paste just appears right in the position you want, is very flexible. You can always go back. It's very useful. Alright, here I played around with the O shape a lot, just to try to see how I like it. It's still a little wonky, but I was trying to get the spacing a little bit more kind of aligned to this little box that I'd ideally like the text to sort of fit in too. And then we're onto the P. I've just been kind of seeing what works, what doesn't. I feel like I could use a lot more experience in sort of text design. I have a lot of appreciation for people who are very good at typography, because I have a bit to learn still. And I'm very excited for the text options in the future that I hear should be coming sometime soon. Yeah, I just chose a very simple sort of sans serif font to not distract too much, because I want the flowers to be the main part. Although I am a bit jealous, because many people in Womp are extremely good at typography and make very beautiful sort of text concepts that I think would also look really great. So it would be fun to experiment. I tried a serif font that was pretty bold in like testing for this, and it just looked a little crazy, but that might have been because of my skills too. Here I'm just starting with the A for alpha, just to make the whole poster Womp themed, and I found, I don't know why, this part, like the alpha word was much easier than the Womp word for me. Maybe just after practicing. But I feel like the letters are less complicated, so it does make it quite easy. I still went back up just to change spacing around, really get the letters exactly how I wanted, and edit a bit more. As you can see, it's all a lot of trial and error, kind of messing things up, then fixing them, or just seeing what looks best to your eye. I zoom out a lot just because I feel like the sizing and weight of each letter is a little hard for me to grasp, especially up close. So just kind of messing around and getting things at least a little bit better oriented, especially in terms of shaping and how like thick each letter is. I found out through here, like, I didn't love the P shape, so I did go back and kind of fix it, make it seem a little bit more even. And then just, I get to copy and paste it here too. I'm just checking measurement again, messing around. Luckily H is a very easy shape, along with L. And I already did the hard parts here, so it's quite easy for this text. I also cut off, I think I forgot to mention, I cut off part of the P, and I wanted to cut off this, like, first A too, just to make the whole sort of transition a little bit more like it should be going Womp to Alpha, like it was connected. Now the text is finally in the place I wanted it to be, so I chose to try out the gradient throughout each letter. And in like going through this and practicing, there is a way to get it very exact, and sort of decreasing, I guess probably saturation maybe, or at least adding more white to each letter, sort of. But I thought, I don't know, it's a lot of work, and it's really nice when it is exact, but also you can kind of eyeball it. You can see here there's a lot of mistakes where it looks a little bit more blue or more purple, but that's also part of the fun of it. You get to just mess around, try out whichever color looks best to you, and then get it exactly how you want. I found it easier to make like the letter you want to change the same letters before and then just going from there. And also in terms of materials, I do prefer, I guess because it's a little lazy of me, to just choose whatever material matches the texture that I want best. And then, so like, if I wanted something very rough, I'd just pick one of the skin, like, preset materials, and then just change the color to what I want. So it's very easy to edit, instead of making a brand new material each time with each primitive. But if you want to be more organized than me, I would suggest probably naming each one or whatever you want, but I'm a little too lazy for that. From here, I'm starting the petal making process with a curve, which I do pretty often actually, use the curve in the square form, just because with roundness you can make it kind of any shape. You can make it a sphere, cylinder, or square or longer shape. Yeah, here I'm just kind of adjusting, trying to make it look how I want. And definitely this is the more static version, because I like making sort of whatever main shape that I'm probably working the longest on. I like creating one that is very easy to adjust and mess with later. So this one's pretty flat because it won't be used in the final. And instead it's always just a base. If something happened to, let's say, like the second copied version that has a lot of tweaks and edits, then I can just come back to this if it's too far gone and I don't really like how it looks. But yeah, here is very much just the basics, trying to really understand the shape and create as much of a like unique side that I want, but also keeping those kind of natural, interesting curves and such. I would say it would be a lot easier to mirror, especially the two like middle petals, because they do seem very similar on each side. I chose not to here, but you easily could. But just for my own personal preference, so that later I can really kind of mess with them, curve one and not the other, and just make like very subtle adjustments that work best. I also use a ton of references for each project. And so at this stage, I'm definitely mostly looking towards that, just trying to get a shape that I like the most. I also really like to use the negative, very goopy kind of spheres or primitives to give a lot of depth to these petals and make it curved and thinner in some areas, thicker in others, and trying to get that sort of natural, unperfect feel. I did notice that in some of these, because of the density of the curves that I chose, it creates this sort of, like, I don't even know, a little wrinkly effect, which I thought was kind of cool, but it's very easy to fix too just by increasing the density or goop strength. But yeah, I don't know if other people use references as much, but I have like a ton for each project. I know the last bigger one I did had close to like 30, 40 different reference pictures just of stuff I like. Maybe that's a sign I use Pinterest too much, but it's very fun just to see other creative people making cool things and then trying to put your own spin on it. Now here I found like the negative material makes a cool effect on the positive sort of petals. So I wanted this kind of pearly look, and I just added some more metalness to the negatives, and so it gives like on the one side a kind of different texture. I also added a bunch of this little like brassy gold. It's not quite gold, I guess. It's a little lighter on the edge just to make it kind of more ornate, I guess. And then to me, shading is one of the most fun parts, especially at Womp makes it so easy with the goop strength, and it just blends right in with curves. So I'm just adding some pink highlights to the ends and edges of the flower just to give that subtle sort of feel. I think I edited a bit later too, just to see what looks best. And it's all about personal preference. There's a lot of very cool materials that would look great. I think I saw one that was in like a reference in like Photoshop or something where it was like a milky glass flower with lots of sort of rainbowy lights, like pinks, purples, blues, that looked really nice too. That would be perfect. Here I'm just duplicating this curve that seemed kind of easy to manipulate, then deleting all the points except for one to start on the flower middle. That's just one nice, quick, and easy way to take what you're working with and get it in the right area to start the next part. Yeah, this part was a little tricky for me to grasp, but I think it finally came along after a lot of edits. But yeah, we're just trying to make this weird sort of like, I don't even know, like spearhead sort of shape for this petal. And one thing I do like using curves too for also is if you double up a very small curve, like in the middle of this, then it will create that nice sort of indent. and that just makes like the other parts stand out a little bit more. It's a little less smooth. I think playing with roundness is very fun as well. For these middle petals, I did choose to do a mirrored curve just because I thought they were a bit more complex, and in a lot of the references I saw, they looked pretty much the same on each side as well. So it's just kind of judging, trying to get this shape. I think the weird part is when you know you're going to add negatives to better define the shape, it's like before you add them, what looks like it would work best with those negatives, kind of. So you're having to think a few steps ahead instead of just going with the flow. And it's a little hard, I know. I'm the type of person that has a hard time when they don't really like how it's coming out. So seeing it in like a weird state, you're like, oh, I can't fix it yet, blah, blah, blah. And then you just have to be patient, try some stuff out, make it look the best that you can. Yeah, this is just me messing around a lot. There's so much trial and error. It's kind of crazy. I feel like I don't really know what I'm doing, but I think that's also kind of a better process in general. It's just kind of fun. You can see how things work. Mess it up and it's all okay. You can always go back. It's just kind of peaceful and fun. And Womp makes it super easy too. Originally, I wasn't sure. I had a few different flowers in mind. Like, those spider lilies? Those would look, I think, really cool here. Like, especially with a glassy material. I think that would be fun. Or just general lilies. Or even, like, I don't know, a rose or such. People have made very nice looking roses on Womp that I would love to try. I just thought an orchid was kind of a little alien, weird flower that has some interesting kind of weird features, and you can make it your own very easily. I feel like with shading, like how some have some of those spots and kind of unique patterns, that would also look really cool if I were to expand upon this a bit more. Oh yeah, in curves, when you like change the angle of a few, I think it looks so good too sometimes. It's very fun to see how much gets manipulated with a few movements too, especially in terms of like when you have a lot of goop strength in one spot, it definitely makes an impact. Yeah, I don't know, you can definitely see I spent probably the most amount of time trying to perfect this flower, have it be sort of the main star, a unique shape within the whole thing. And it's kind of interesting because from the outside it does look pretty simple and very basic, but you can easily make it extremely complex and overthink it a bit. As long as you like it, though, I think that's what's worth it in the end. Just making something pretty, fun, unique. Here you can tell I'm a bit unsatisfied with that middle lower petal. And at this time in making it, I didn't realize it was mainly because it was too small and not enough of an interesting shape. But here I was still like just puzzled, and I'm like, okay, let's move on to the middle piece. We'll deal with it later. And this was actually just two very goopy like cylinders that are mirrored and then have a negative spot. But it took a little bit to get that weird like sort of mini leaf kind of look. I don't know what part of the plant that is, but I don't know. It was interesting from the little reference. I liked it. Also, the negative colors with goop, I think, is one of my favorite parts again. And here I like making the middle this yellowy color, giving just a bit more, I don't know, pizzazz. Here again, I'm kind of questioning everything, trying to see how big this middle piece even should be, what like length these middle petals should be, how the inside should look. When honestly, you might not notice too much from the far away position it's going to be, but it's kind of satisfying if you get it right how you like it, and then you can use it for any sort of project too. Do you guys zoom out a lot in your work? I find that I always like, maybe because like a past art class or something taught me, but I feel like I always have to look from far to check. I'm like, okay, does it look normal, or is it is it all wonky from up close? Just changing perspective. I do that all the time. I saw in the reference that it had this weird little like spindly part, so I was trying to recreate that. I feel like with a very low density and having this be kind of like the dots, it would also look really good in this type of project. But here, I don't know if you can even see it from the final position. Here you can see I'm kind of just eyeballing, seeing how it looks. I kept that one original kind of locked away and you don't see it, just in case I make a weird change with this that I don't like, that's hard to go back to. But here you can see I forgot to grab the negatives, but you're just kind of twisting, turning, making this more interesting. I like being able to grab like specific parts of the curve and bring it in on certain sides and just mess with a lot of different angles at once to make it look kind of like flowy, natural, or even a little weird is fun too. I realized later that these bottom petals, like, to me, I think maybe are a little bit on the thin side, but it was from one kind of reference I used that I guess some just have much thinner, like middle petals, and others have very thick ones. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can mess with and see. Yeah, you can see here, this is kind of why I chose not to mirror in the first place, just because I like having each petal be altered at least a little bit differently, and I think that makes it a little bit more natural, I'd say. But the mirrored also would look very nice too, so it's just about your personal taste. Here you can see I'm finally changing that middle piece to be a little bit more evenly sized and a cooler shape. And by now I think I have like almost 2 to 3 negative spheres, just kind of creating that weird sort of, it honestly looks like a snail manta ray from this point of view almost, but I thought it looked kind of cool. It was different, so fun to make. At first I tried to get rid of those little wings or make them less noticeable, but then I realized that kind of looked weirder, so that became pretty much the final sort of idea. I changed the inside just so you'd see more of the gold brassy color instead of the pink, just to have another reflective sort of surface. From here I kind of go into the positioning a little bit more. Still a lot of alterations, just seeing what looks best by eye, and then it will be more like, where should this flower kind of be? How should the stem be coming in? I thought it would be neat to have like the stem coming from the back of this kind of inward, so it's popping out at you a little bit. Not too much, but like slightly. So this one would come forward, all the top would be closest to you, sort of. And then the stem would be further back, and so there'd be some flowers kind of on the inside, some leaves on the inside, and then some at least kind of popping out. So here's just judging what depth seems proper or best for this. So I didn't go out too far. I feel like you could go very crazy and have it in your face, but I knew I wanted to spin it around a little bit, and so I wanted something slightly more subtle, just looking good. Yeah, for these copies, I knew I wanted around 3 flowers. Usually I go for sort of an odd number to get that asymmetrical balance that's still interesting to look at. And then that middle one, again, is kind of in the front. We have that tiny one in the back where the stem would come down. Hopefully there will be some like buds, some leaves, what I'm thinking here. And then I'm making the tiny adjustments just so each flower is unique and in a different kind of rotational area. I noticed those like middle pieces looked a little tiny, so I went back and edited those. And then the smallest one on the bottom is turned in a much different way. Not too much, but a little slightly different way. At this point, I just like being able to scroll back, hit the center view, hit the left, and then just see it straight on to kind of map like where things would look best, where it's a little too concentrated. You can see there, like, that tiny one was a bit big. it's very subtle and tiny adjustments, but I think in the end kind of come together to make a much more polished piece that you will like more. After getting those flowers kind of in position, I just minimized and locked them from view for now, just to be able to easily make this leaf, which was very simple, easy to do with the mirror tool. I had experimented and tried like a curve to create that sort of line, or even like a super small cylinder, and it just, I don't know. To me this looks best because you can curve and alter, it doesn't have to be a flat leaf. So I love the mirror tool for this. Just giving it more dimension, having certain slightly more natural curves for a less natural looking leaf. From here, I've had this like sort of occasional issue with curves where it kind of goes back to the default state, but it's not too hard to fix. But all I wanted to do here was add a negative of that exact same curve to go behind the positive original curve, just to make it thinner and a little bit more leaf-like, curvier. Here I'm messing around with shading. I think these kind of look a little crazy at first, always, when you're going around with stuff. I started with a like dark, very dark emerald kind of color, or bright green, and then added a very warm gray, sort of lighter green. I also here messed around with some of the gold to give it some that sort of like weird look, just because I think the Womp materials are so easy to adjust. It's kind of fun to have that unnatural element too with it. It just makes it slightly more interesting. I mean, the metals are so pretty. It's just fun to play around with. Here I'm just messing around with each leaf. It's kind of cool to have the inverse, and with that negative, the other side also looks quite interesting. Let's see, I kind of scrapped that up there, but it works better on the other sides. And still kind of maintains the semi-leaf-like shape. At least the curves and kind of areas look slightly more interesting than something very flat and stagnant. Here I think the rotations are just very fun, the sizes, just getting the balance that you think looks best, and sort of getting that inner outer part of this competition with the stem coming out. Here you can see I didn't even consciously do it, but I think there's 5 leaves maybe total again. So I don't know why. The odd numbers just tend to look a little bit better if you're not making a very symmetrical sort of style piece. Here I'm just fixing a lot of the colors and aspects just to try to make something that looks a little bit more appealing with the rest of the colors. I know the green stands out a lot, but I wanted it, because the leaves don't have too much detail, to be slightly less like in your face. Yeah. Again here, just a lot of trial and error, trying out like 3 to 5 colors for certain spots, just seeing what looks best, what you think is cool, and then going from there. You can see the first like initial leaf looks very stripy, because I did notice that like negative part of the curve, if you have the same color in both spots in the negative and like positive, it's super vibrant, so it would be bright gold in a certain spot. So kind of interesting. I just duplicated that curve to start on the bud process, and again using just some mirrored options here, making something pretty simple, but it gets the message across. And then the shading here was really fun. Just a little bit of the pink and gold. Something kind of cute. I feel like lots of petals or maybe a slightly more open bud would look really nice on this type of piece. Maybe with different flowers, other stuff. Here I'm just messing with the angles, trying to get those two top buds to kind of pop out too, and kind of sort of follow in line with the stem. Hopefully it doesn't look too crazy. And also just trying to balance everything out a little bit. Here come just some final adjustments, making things look exactly how I want, seeing the lighting. I know this weird like shadow does appear when the lighting is from the left like this. And I don't know, I didn't mind it too much in this piece. I think that's because I had it moving so much. But I do show you in the end, if you just like kind of move everything, I think it's like 45 degrees to the left or something, you can mostly get rid of that and add in lights to minimize the effect of that shadow. Here I'm finally starting with the stem. It's interesting because I think here and when like starting on the flower, I used more default colors that weren't what I usually would. Whereas I think in a lot of my other projects I do like the materials so much that I usually kind of mess with them in process instead of at the end. Like I don't usually shade at the end. Whereas here, I think maybe it was a little easier to see process-wise. Kind of just going along with the curve, seeing what feels right. I know all of these pieces somehow have to sort of attach, so it's this weird like coming out and going backwards action, then adjusting from there. I don't know if I mentioned here, I think I started with a lower roundness for the stem curve, just because when you like go back into it, then it's easier to get a more solid natural shape by just increasing that overall roundness. Here's just like what I think would look best, especially from the final part, and then I'll go in and really adjust things. I think many more like smaller curves will come to join that just to make it look more natural. Obviously you could skip that or do only like the bud or certain flowers that you see if you're going straight on. Like some leaves behind the flowers, I don't think you'd need the stems unless you were trying to go from a different angle or so. But here I did want each one just to be attached, just so that the animation would look interesting, so that it seemed more real a little bit. yeah, as you can see, a lot of this is just testing stuff out, seeing if you like an adjustment, and then going from there, or moving everything to get an adjustment you would rather have. Like, I knew that little stem I wanted to have slightly above that petal, just so it doesn't get lost behind. So the whole bud tended to have to move as well. The other thing I might suggest is, like, it would be much easier if you didn't have the frames here. I think just to go back and forth. And same with the background. Like, anytime I definitely could have, like, hid either of those or both. And you could just kind of move around the flower effortlessly. But I must have just kept it as the guide just to see how it would look, how it balances on everything. Now making the final adjustments, adding those last little stems in. Making it move, just doing whatever seems more natural. Like if it looks like it's gonna curve up, like the leaf is falling, maybe the stem is also in more of a falling motion. Maybe just seeing, like, would the flower and leaf be coming from a very similar spot, or would it be further down, more up? Kind of having all sorts of curves in different directions. I think just makes it look a little bit more appealing. Like here I thought they were too close together, so I just joined, making it seem like the leaf came from the same major point as the flower. You can see I couldn't quite make up my mind, and then ended up going back anyway. As these last little parts go on, just some little adjustments. I also decided to play around with a few material changes just to see what it would have looked like. And I think in one, I changed the background to be more of like an aqua instead of pink, changed the flowers as well, and then tried a very glassy, sort of transparent look, which just on every material changed. Like put the glass all the way up, put the transparency all the way up, and then added a little bit of roughness wherever I liked. And so that came out as an interesting sort of type as well. I think I show in the end. Then I also tried just pure metal, and that looked pretty cool too. So there's so many options. I'd love to see anyone else's take, or if they're doing something similar. I think the floral pieces are just fun, very beautiful. You can see here I'm just adding more of that brassy gold. Just to get a weird, sort of a more like magical fake look, because we have access to that, so it's very fun to use. Finally, I'm just kind of showing what a couple of lights I often use would look like, whereas I usually go for a very warm kind of color and just messing around, anything in that orangey yellow range. I'm also showing here just what I mentioned before, that quick way to minimize the shadows, get rid of a few. You do have to add, I think, a light here in the background just to make sure it isn't super dark. And that's kind of it. Here's the other alternative materials just to show. If you've gotten to this point, thank you so much. I've learned an incredible amount from everyone around me and in the Womp community. I love seeing everyone's posts, so I hope to see yours soon. Thanks again.